Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 60-second live stream for the Misfit Gamer Studios. I am your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, I have Kage here with me in the studio, and we will be discussing properly using NPCs, but not just utilizing them in the game. We're going to actually be covering quite a few aspects. We're going to be discussing our approach to building NPCs, to utilizing them to advance the plot, utilizing them in combat, and we're going to be discussing some of the pros, cons, and ethical, moral questions of using NPCs for moments of like Deus Ex Machina moments, and breaking the rules that you wouldn't let your PCs play. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We don't really have any other updates, so we're just going to get right into it. Let me get him in. I already see some activity in chat, so we'll get to that here in a second. There we go. What is up, my friend? How are we doing today?
Well, hello, my friends and neighbors. It is wonderful to be back in the studio.
Excellent. Good week.
Yeah.
Good week so far.
Yeah, it's been pretty chill. You know, making stuff happen, moving pretty smoothly. I'm here for it.
All right, we already got Cosmic. Cosmic, great to see you already in the chat as always.
Like you do.
He's been working on Majesty of Tiamat's Spite. It's the curse, I guess. And then he has some powerful effects, which counterparts. Every one good effect has a bad effect. Oh, okay. That's kind of cool. I kind of like that, like back and forth. We've talked a lot about doing stuff like that.
Interesting. So this is like a curse that like Tiamat like imposes upon others.
I'm curious, yeah. This is one of the ones that he was asking us which order we wanted to get his stuff in.
Got you.
We wanted the
subclass.
Yeah, we wanted the subclass because it goes along with the spell that he just created. But this is going to be one that he's kind of just teasing us with.
No, I like
that will be coming up soon. So hopefully we'll be getting that in the future.
Smirk. I see you.
Evil smirk, yeah. The ultimate downside. But is the ultimate downside to the caster or to the I guess the ultimate downside is the cursed person, but it would be curious to see what the ultimate downside is.
Facts.
All right. Let's see. Do we have anybody else that we know in chat right now? It doesn't look like... Baba Kiss is here. Hey, Baba Kiss. Nice to see you.
Excellent. Welcome.
We have a couple newbies in chat that I don't recognize. Would like to hear from you if you all have anything to say. But today's topic is going to be NPCs. I was really... I was having a hard time right before stream figuring out the title that I wanted to do for the stream. I wasn't exactly sure exactly what the topic was going to be because I had an idea in mind, and obviously it was just specifically around NPCs. But it all started with asking the question of, I guess, is it right, or not so much is it, but more when it's correct to break the rules with an NPC. And I realized, talking with Kage here, kind of prepping for today's session, that it's a lot bigger on approach, right? It's not so much just breaking rules, because at first I was just like in combat or in a cinematic, and that was where my mind was really specific to, is like in combat and in cinematics, right? And we'll get into that more, and we'll break that down more specifically. But by cinematic, I mean, what I like to also call cutscenes, just your narrative, right? When NPCs do something during a narration that would not normally be allowed or not normally be able to, right? Excuse me. I think like superhero, like the superhero landing is a common one we'll use as an example. But yeah, we realize that there's also a lot more to it, because there's the creation process of NPCs, and that isn't always the same as how a player has to create their character. So I realized that the title's a little bit misleading. We just kind of needed a title. So properly using NPCs is a very misleading blanket title, because really what we're going to be talking about today is... Well, I guess it is properly using NPCs, but it's all facets of using NPCs. I
think like it's like using NPCs in a way that works well for you.
Yeah,
you and your table.
And purely,
you know
purely from a DM point of view of our perspective of what's, ethical, moral, but in I guess in reality, what do all DMs do? We're going to talk about like what we all know that DMs do,
I think
but ways that we can approach it differently in order to better balance things and be better fair on ourselves, be better fair on our players, and keep consistency. So that's what we want to really talk about.
I think Cosmos got a good point. You know, a lot of the times players will see something like that and call the DM out and be like, hey, you know, that's a dick move. You're doing that and we can't do that, you know. And
right.
They definitely get that mindset, which is, again, you and I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I like giving my players an opportunity to break the rules, right? Like, I like giving them chances, and especially if you're using your own creativity to do something that might not normally do that, or like maybe it could, but it's not supposed to, or I really want to be able to do this. Let me find a way that I can make it work, or whatever the case may be.
Or I've seen this too. This one, oh my gosh, this one boggles my mind because it's already unacceptable in video games. You see this all the time in video games, right? You've probably seen YouTube videos making fun of this too. But you're battling a boss in a video game and you can make the boss surrender and now he's your companion. And during this battle, this boss was throwing death beam at you. They were raising, demons from hell against you. They made a meteor shower drop on you. Every hit was taking 800 points. And you turn around into the next battle against some bandits and they're like, boop, I did 10 points of death. Boop. It's like, do your massive spell. It's like, oh, okay. Laser beam for 20 points of damage. Like what happened, right? Where was the monstrosity that I fought? And the biggest, issue is that there's no explanation for the power level down, like the downward power level. Mm-hmm. Like, you were still just as powerful after that boss fight. You were still hitting for just as much damage. You still have just as much health. Nothing has changed about your character, and nothing changes about your character when you lose a battle. Not like that. You don't suddenly downgrade 50 levels. But what happens to these weapons that a boss was carrying that,
and then
that can swipe and hit 15 enemies at once, and then you pick it up and you get the hit 2 enemies at once bonus. Like, whoa, he just hit the whole party with one swing. Why can I only barely hit 2 people, and then it has to be a con save in order to do and I get
that's
it.
the game's DM being a dick.
Because you see this in video games, but that's why it drives me mad when I see DMs do this.
Yeah, but that's also why DMs think they can do that.
And what I mean, that specifically what I'm talking about here is I've had DMs where they will show off a later level NPC. Like, let's say there was a one DM specifically online that I was playing with where he had this thing where he would bring up higher level NPCs, and typically they would be fashioned versions, quote unquote, of our characters. So it would be like, if you had a paladin, a high level paladin would once in a while come in, and not the same one, but it would basically just be like snippets of what you could become.
You could be, or something like that.
And I've had other DMs do smaller level stuff, but like this one really stood out because he would just specifically do this, but he would highlight them in the most awkward of ways, where they would do things and it's like, oh my God, like, so that's what I'm building up towards. And then like you'd either get there and the thing that they were doing isn't either A, what you thought, or not available, or when you get it, again, it's that whole, this isn't what I saw them doing, but it was like, oh, well, in context, it was much more powerful because they weren't, because again, like, think about like, I remember one specifically, it was like a spell where one of them had this like spell where he was just like, like holding back hordes of undead. It was just like, he was basically just like waving his hand and like almost like turn undead, but more powerful. And he was just like holding them back. And then it's like, you've like finally got there and the person got it. And it was like,
you can stop like 2 or 3 of them, but not like an entire
And it
horde.
was like, well, what happened to that? But then it was like it was like a wishy-washy explanation. But essentially what it read as when they explained it was, oh, well, they were just, using it against much lower levels. It's like, oh, okay. So because we level up and every enemy around us levels up.
We'll never be able to use it at that scale.
But when he was using it, they were way, way low level. So basically it was like he was level 20 against level 1s when we saw it. But now that we're level 20, we only ever get to fight against level 20. So the thing that we saw get used will never be used in the way that we saw it. because we will never be in those situations. And I've seen this so many times with DMs
Yeah.
where it's like they show you something that's enticing that makes you want to achieve it, and then you finally get there and they're like, I mean, you have it, but you know, that was super specific what I was doing, so yeah, you don't really get the cool thing about it. And it's like, I get it, you know, but it's
It
like
feels raw, man.
I feel like what it is like it's that was my idea, and I wanted to show off my idea, so come up with your own. That's how it feels to me. And it's also, it could also, but that's sometimes, I feel like maybe, I'll be honest, that's kind of biased. Maybe that's just me because I've had shitty DMs like that. And maybe in the reality is that it's not malice. The reality is probably just that it was in the moment. It was something that made cool for the scenario, the situation, the plot, the story, the narrative, whatever you want to call it. And they did it. And it wasn't meant to be taken as a consistency.
And on that note, like I've seen very similar things where, and this is a struggle for me sometimes, because there will be times where, you know, I like your players will get themselves into a situation that's like really screwy, and you want to help them. You don't want them to die. You're like, you know, this is kind of my fault. Like I could have warned them better. Like, oh my, like, I didn't realize it. And so, but you're already there. You don't want to retcon everything, but you want to find a way to make it work better. And so you do something, you make a choice in a moment to help, to whatever the case may be. You could have good intentions. You could have, you know, I just want to make myself look cool, or you're not allowed to touch this boss right now. And so you make something happen. So whatever it is that they're trying to do doesn't work. But then when they realize that whatever you just did, because it occurred in this world, they're like, okay, well, if that's possible, then X, Y, and Z must be possible. And then you're like, okay, I opened up a whole can of worms. That can't work. No. And so then people try to back, and it just feels bad. And
again, it's I don't, you know, it's so funny because we could go, we're not going to get into the IRL reasons why humans react that way, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of things, and it's not just entitlement. It's not just, you know, people like consistency and people like expectations. And we've talked about this before where, you know, there's a lot of different ways to approach, you know, D&D. And a lot of people, I feel, once they've played quite a bit, definitely have an expectation when they approach it. So when DMs throw things at them that are new, their expectation is that this new thing can now be adopted as part of the consistency, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the hard thing, is getting over that, getting over the fact that, you know, that there's going to be those inconsistencies between DMs and even just within the game itself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where this topic is really kind of going to lead us, is into the ways that we have mitigated our use of NPCs over the years. I know for me, I've vastly changed how I use and develop and work my NPCs into my campaigns, into my story, as well as how I build them, like how I actually have them written out, you know, and stat wise, because I feel that I've tried a lot of different ways to do it, and I don't think there's any one. I think we've talked about this a little bit before stream. There's no one good way. There's no one way that I'm going to say like, hey, this is how you need to make NPCs, because that was what I was trying to do. All of those years, I was trying to find the way to make NPCs. And the problem you run into is there's more than one way to get there, and not all roads lead to the same place. So the fact is yes, there's multiple ways to get there, but you can't get there from those different positions from all starting points. So that's what I started to learn, is that you can't just have a set way of doing it. And granted, if it does work, if people have a set way, I'm not suggesting that, you know, that they need to adopt more stuff. But for me, I learned that there is a good way to balance out creating NPCs, bringing them into the story, you know, introducing them into the story, and utilizing them throughout it. And then out of game, I think there's a good balance between how to balance whether an NPC should be purely narrative, purely roleplay, and which ones need to actually have a written out like character sheet or some. I don't mean a full character sheet,
Right.
but some sort of documentation. Because I do feel like there's going to be a quite a bit of a difference, for everybody. And for me, I use multiple different ways when I'm creating NPCs, but they all eventually funnel into a final product, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting because when I think about creating NPCs, like especially because of how generally speaking my world works, and it's very render as you go type deal, like once you touch something. But there's also moments where, like, just for me, I know that I'll get inspired and I'll have a really cool idea that I like and I want to implement. I want to create something, and maybe I don't have a game to put it in, so I build it as an NPC. And so I'll just have these, like, what I call pocket NPCs that I have that I think are cool.
I like that.
And
Pocket NPCs.
And kind of like you were talking about, I build those from the ground up like a player character, because that's my idea. That's the reason why I'm building this particular character. Maybe I want to play test this character, and I'm going to play test them at a certain level in certain situations, and I'm just going to use my PCs as people to help me play test that, or whatever the case may be. But also having those pocket NPCs, sometimes like you, I find the perfect place to put them. I find the perfect time, like, oh, I need someone to do X, Y, and Z right now. This person is great for that, right? And so I can use them here. And, again, you want to make it make sense. You don't want them to be on the other side of the world or have some sort of other job that would make them have no reason to be there. But, like, if you can find a way to make it work, to make it make sense, then it's a beautiful place. But then there's those other times where I have random shopkeep Joe Schmo, and then you want a full backstory. You want to go meet his kids, and now we're going on this whole adventure, and now he's turned into an NPC that's rolling around with you guys, and he's getting stats, and he's becoming, and so he's developing throughout, and there's all kinds of, I don't know. For me, there's a lot of different ways that stuff ends up manifesting, but
and so excuse me. So there's a few different ways that I go about like creating, because it really coming down to discussing how to use NPCs, I think comes down first to how was the NPC created, because I think that right there says a lot about how it's going to end up being used. So when you have a pre-thought out NPC that is going to be a cornerstone to the campaign, right? Someone that is either like, if especially if it's going to be the narrative based type of NPC where they're giving you the quest, or they're going to be regularly checking up on you. These are ones that you've obviously put a lot of thought in. You've obviously put a lot of lore and background personality into, right? Now, usually when I'm creating an NPC, we've talked about, or we've mentioned the idea between a roleplay or narrative-based NPC, which is just going to be there to give dialogue or to be in the background to do something during the cutscenes, during those off moments. And then there's the interactive NPC, ones that are in fights.
I call them the helper NPCs. Sometimes there's one that like always travels with the party, and it's just there. Like if nobody has any ideas, they give a random suggestion.
Those are the ones that I call like interacting, because those are the ones that like have stuff. Like interacting, I don't even consider, like I consider shopkeeps more narrative, because again they're giving the plot along. Yeah. Whereas like interacting, they have their own, they have their own purpose and their own expectations. They're usually traveling with the party. They're just the enemies, or they're, the BBEG or something like that. Those kind of NPCs. And then of course there's the like stationary or the static NPCs in the realm, right? And those we'll probably get into a little bit differently, because those are also a different category, right? Your static NPCs, like the known NPCs, if you're of your of your setting, right? The people, the gods, the immortals, the kings, those kind of static NPCs, and
People
then
with lore.
and right now I think we're talking about the lower level where it's like the NPCs that travel with your character or that fight your character or that are just somewhere just in the general vicinity of your character's like actual gaming. And yeah, so when you're creating those, I have, we have the role play version versus the actual interactive version, which would have like some sort of character sheet. And I kind of have my own way of deciding like the line of when that obviously is going to happen, right? When I need to start like deciding those factors. Obviously combat's one, if there's going to be a chance, yes, if there's ever a chance that this NPC is going to be actually active, engaged in combat, like, they're traveling with the party or whatever, then yeah, they're going to get like a character sheet. They're going to get stats because that makes now more sense. Now, I don't always create a complete character sheet like a player would, but I do have modified versions that I can quickly throw, rolled stats in to fill out in order to get a character. Now, there's also the difference between like if it's like an NPC that they're just escorting. If I have to assign health, but only health to an NPC for a situation, that may not be enough for me to worry about the rest of the stats, right?
Right.
Because in the situation of like a shopkeep that, if you're a bunch of murder hobos and you have a shopkeeps, you're probably going to, if you don't just give it 1 health, you're probably just going to give it like 5-10 health or whatever. Or if, if they're going to be something that's not involved directly in combat, but could take damage, you're probably going to give it some sort of like damage. Stat, maybe an AC, something stupid. But, the idea of that is it wouldn't justify a full character sheet. But once they're going to be actively engaged in doing things, I start to treat it more that way. I start to actually like write things down because after that point, it's one thing to have some notes on personality, importance, background, what they're going to do. But, if it's always just going to be like a king and not the, the BBEG king, just a king in the background that gave you, the job that you're talking to his advisors. He's in the background. Maybe you talk to him once. He's going to give you the medal at the very end. I'm never going to give that guy stats unless the party, of course, puts him into a situation where I need to invent them. That guy just has a base understanding of how he reacts, how he talks
socially,
how I represent him and how he's going to interact with the party. That's all he needs. I don't need anything else from him, right? He's not going to ever he's not the BBEG. He's not secretly going to like be some knight, that's not his purpose. If he's just the king, he's just the king. I don't need anything more than that. The advisor has a name, has a background, has lore. He's never going to be anything more than the guy that gave you the job, right? Like, these are not NPCs I expect to be put in situations that...
Guy behind the counter at the bar, you know what I mean?
Exactly. But when I create an NPC, if they get past a certain point to where I know or I plan on having them do stuff, that's when I start writing stat blocks. If I know that they're going to be antagonists...
On the first part, on that first section, the people that you would say there aren't stats for, I had an idea, and I'm curious because I'm genuinely thinking about implementing this. It's like, what if you had what you call like standard tier stats, right? Basically, you have your peasant stats, right? And it's just basically anybody who I might need to roll something for incidentally that I don't want to have to create personalized stats for. You could fall into like one of these tiers, and it's like, okay, the very bottom tier, it's like you are a basic NPC, you've had no training, like guards.
Yeah,
like they could have
I've had similar ideas of making something similar, not necessarily tiers like that, but yeah, I've had something similar where it was like categories of like these kind of people.
Yeah.
It got to a point to where the reason why I have the whole category of no stats is because it gets to the point to where it's so rare that, because I have so many of those type of NPCs that I just don't need to bother with stats. And when it comes up, the way that I now approach it is, if they were never expected to be able to do anything, right? They weren't expected to be able to fight or do anything else like that. It's going to be all contextual. So again, like what we talked about, like role play classes or role play feats, it's a role play NPC in the sense of like, it won't need stats for whatever gets inflicted upon it, right? Like you try to throw him into battle, he won't need stats for that because it will more or less just role play out, right? Like if you want to attack him, I'm not going to bother you rolling to attack. You're going to just attack him and murder him, right? If you throw him if you throw him into battle and try to get him to fight on your side, he's basically going to be useless.
A meat popsicle.
Yeah,
He'll have his turn to be sliced in half, and then
Right.
We'll move on.
And it's one of those things where if you want to poison him, I would make it a percentage chance that he survives it, right? Forget worrying about what's his constitution. That's my point. Why do I care? In the moment, this guy was never important enough to give a stat in the first place. So if you're going to poison him, he has a 10% chance of surviving it. Why worry about, well, he might have a 15 constitution. Who cares? He's just the guy you try to poison. Would you want to give him a better chance, or do you want him to only have 10%? And to me, it's always contextual, because that's, again, and we've talked about this before with High Point.
I hear that.
It's more about pushing the narrative and the plot along. It's more about giving the players. I don't like holdups. I don't like stalls in games. One of my the things that I really disliked about as a player is being stuck because of details or semantics. It's one thing to plot and plan and work with your party. It's another thing to just be stuck somewhere talking with an NPC for nothing. I'd like to get the plot along, and that's where something like that, where it's like that level of these NPCs, it would take so much for me to bother to give them stats. It's easier to just let it be contextual if and when that happens, right? Because there's so many other NPCs that are more likely to get involved. I'll have a guard that an NPC that's like the right-hand guard of that king. So you could talk to the advisor, you could talk to the guard, but you could talk to all of those people, but his right-hand knight and maybe his his court wizard are the actual NPCs I've created with stat blocks. Because if you're going to attack the king, those two are the most likely who are going to engage in combat to protect him, right? If he needs something done, those would be the ones most likely to be sent to go do it. He doesn't need a stat block, but they will.
Right.
And that's the way that I kind of categorize those things. Again, it's like, yes, there's always a chance someone will need stats. I just usually make it contextual at that point. But I like just being able to have, this side thing. I've done it many different ways before. I've done cue cards where I just have, name, personality, and just a couple bullet points of like how to be, how to act, how to do the voice.
Need to get better at that, because I'll create something on the spot and then completely forget part of like their personality. Like, were they super chipper, or were they kind of monotone? Like, which it's a problem.
Exactly. And so there's so many different ways to organize those, right?
Yeah.
But it is easier when you're not dealing with massive amounts of character sheets and you're just dealing with personality types and information that they would be able to have, right? So it's a much easier category to deal with, and a lot of that's just your high level NPCs, right? The vast majority of those are gods, immortals, nobles, non-important NPCs, but people that like if you build a town and that you have like farms on the outside, yes, you can go to any one you want, but I'm going to have like the main road. I'll probably have one or two pre-planned out of, okay, those are most likely the people you're going to run into. So I can pick those people out and have that little personality booklet ready. No big character sheet or anything. So if you go to that town, you're most likely, unless you do something weird, like, well, I'm going to come in from the west side of town. Well, there's no main road there. Well, I'm not just going to force you to meet these NPCs because, and it's like, no, they were on the main road. That's where they stay. Now you've opened up a new thing. But that's just how I prep my NPCs of what's the expectation that they're actively going to be needed in anything, right? And that makes also combat easier, to be completely honest. Yeah. Like, let's say you have a bunch of these non-important NPCs and then you force start a fight like in a bar. It's like, okay, give them all 1 to 10 hit points, because that's pretty much what peasants usually have. Maybe make a couple of them like slightly bit stronger. And then it's like, how difficult is it in that moment? Why worry about having this whole character sheet and all of the other stats? It's like, okay, these guys are using either improvised weapons or daggers. Like, they're not like these peasants that are just random, people. Just give them the basics and just start having them roll 1d4, 1d6 damage. Like, Just put it in your head. These guys are hella weak. So if you don't roll over a 17, they ain't hitting your party. That's the things that I do. Again, in contextual moment, if you force me to make a stat, I'll be like, look, okay, he picks up a frying pan. That's going to probably do 1d4 plus 1 damage because, it's pretty heavy and it's actually hot because he just pulled it off the stove. But he's going to take at least 17 to hit your AC. So I just put that number in my head because it's easy, right? Why bother? You guys have high ACs. And why even ask you for your AC? It's like, I can even ask you guys, like, what's the average AC? I'm just going to be like, look, I know you guys are just way higher and better than these guys. If I'm not rolling 20s, I'm not hitting you. It's going to be laughable that these guys are even attacking. That's contextual makes sense to me, right? But if you're in a bar,
I definitely feel that.
If I tell you you're in a bar full of, like
seedy
warriors or, people who have like you aren't just going to get around. Like I'm probably going to have a couple like of those guys, like you may start the fight and then 3 of them walk up to you. These are the 3 that I have stat blocks for, but that's all I need. Like those 3 are basically going to be the ones that take care of you. That's those things where it's like, those are those, moments where I can pull in something I've pre-planned, but not everything needs to be that way.
Yeah.
And I think just knowing that, I think having that idea out there that you can have just a buttload of NPCs that just are just ideas that are just people that with pieces of information and personalities, just kind of helps the idea of creating NPCs feel a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people feel like you have to just have a whole character sheet built for any major NPC, and it's like, not really. Cue card works. just a couple bullet points of what you need to remember about who that NPC is. But we keep dancing around, or we keep talking about creating NPCs, but there was a big point of that topic that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like talking about, which side you burn the candle on, right? Because there are 2 ways to go about creating an NPC. And there is the stat block up method, the ground up or the stat block up method, which is pretty much what players do. That's how they create their characters, which is, you're creating what the thing is based off their stats. You create all the stats, you create the personality, you build it all from the base up, and then you implement. And that's fine. I think that's a really great way. And I think it's a great way to do NPCs. I think it's the most daunting. And I think it's the one that makes the idea of pre-planning NPCs feel the most
especially when you have a large list of them to do.
And this is where I'm saying is like, this is not the time that you need to worry about. Like all of those other people don't need this level. But I think a lot of people feel that way. And this is where they're like, oh man, I'll never finish my NPC list. And it's like, probably because you're expecting to do all of these stat blocks. But the stat blocks, I only build a character sheet out like from the get-go for an NPC if I know for a fact I have plans to use them, or if I just know it's like this has a higher than 80% chance that it falls into being used, right? Not necessarily saying like I'm going to put this because they are going to go here, but if I'm like, I'm creating this thing, but I also gave them this ability to like get this thing involved. So yeah, I'm probably going to need a stat block for it because I kind of accidentally made it was going to be, I don't know how else to explain that. I'm like falling over my words on that one, but yeah, the idea that I pre-plan those because I either know that they're going to be used or there's a high likelihood of them. The other option is to implement the NPC where it's needed and then build the stat block out, like reverse model it. And what I mean by that is you build the NPC to fit a need and then figure out how you could have built a character and leveled it up to get there.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, a lot of people, I think, struggle with the balancing is I think if you start it from the ground up, it feels daunting and you don't always get exactly what you wanted and you can get kind of lost. It's like there's a lot of stuff to deal with. But I think what happens too is when you build an NPC for a purpose, when you put the NPC in place and just say, hey, I need it to do all of this stuff. And then you try to look back on it and go, okay, well, how would that work with game mechanics? I think a lot of people, that's where they derail their ideas or they start to get into those inconsistent areas where how is that possible that it can do X, Y, and Z? You know what I mean? Based off the rules or based off of, what spells it has or based off of what class it is, right? And I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring that up is because I've always struggled with deciding how much to allow an NPC to fill before I worry about like the balancing, right? Like that's the other part of the topic too, is like when NPCs are allowed to break the rules.
Yeah.
Because that's the hardest thing is like obviously as a DM, any NPC can break any rule they want, but we like our consistency. So an NPC being able to break a rule needs to have some sort of consistency. That means that rule has to be consistently broken by that NPC
In the consistent
same way. And it needs to have that backup reason of like, where did that come from? And I found I was running into that a whole lot more when I was just creating NPCs to just be like, oh, I just need an NPC there and he needs to be able to do all of this without really thinking about like what that would actually mean. And I'm always interested in hearing what people consider balance in terms of like DM versus player, because I'm always of the mindset that anything I do put in my game, anything that my NPCs can do, and I don't care what level of NPC it is, if an NPC can do it, if it's seen by a player in my game, they can achieve the exact same thing. Whether or not it's available right away, that
how easy it is to
it's
get.
not as simple as just, well, what book is that in? I have it now. But I don't like the idea of upselling and then downplaying when they finally get it.
Yeah.
I like the idea of if you see something and you want that exact same thing, it is possible to obtain that exact same thing. It just may be a very long process, right? Like I said, like you see gods in my realm, becoming a god is possible. Like those, to me, that's important. But I know to a lot of people that isn't. So I've always struggled with how do I make these NPCs fit, but in a way that would be achievable for players. I spent a long time trying to figure out how to say that, but that's when I'm creating an NPC, I started early on just filling a need and then figuring it out later. And I run into that problem because I constantly would build an NPC and then have a hard time figuring out how would a player achieve that. And it's not so much that I think my NPCs always need to be created like a player should be created, from the ground up by every rule by the book. But whatever I do create should be somehow obtainable by the rules that I have set forth on my players. So this rule doesn't always apply to everybody, right? If you're a rules lawyer, this rule definitely doesn't apply, because if you have NPCs that break the rules, but you're, a DM that says, no, all players follow the rules, that doesn't work for you. But for me, if I create something that isn't in the leveling up process, right? If I create an NPC that does something that technically, if you looked through the book, there's no direct process there. That's where I have to go out of my way to make sure that High Point provides that process. Whether it's, why I allow player created feats. If you want to level up, but there's not a feat or a skill that the book quite has, but it matches your character and it makes perfect sense, that's a consistency that I do allow, to where it's like, it's still a feat. The book doesn't limit what you can do. It's just the starting, right? It's just the start.
Kind of like the template, lightweight.
And that's where I start to consider, that's how I've started to consider like how I build my NPCs of, okay, if I want to build this NPC and get it to a certain point, I get comfortable, I figure out what it needs to be able to do, but every step of the way, instead of worrying about what the book would do and what stats it would follow, I'm constantly thinking, okay, if it can do this, is there a logical way a player could get here?
Gotcha.
I'm constantly asking myself that question when I'm creating those high-level NPCs. When I want to create something like new in combat, when I want them to be able to do something that's not quite exactly how the book would say they can do it, I would ask myself, like, okay, how would I allow my player to get here? And if it comes down to that point, like the superhero landing thing, right? If I have an NPC that comes down in superhero lands and they're supposed to be a level 1, And I'm like, well, he didn't cast a spell. It's not Featherfall. Like, if I go through all these things and I'm like, there's no real way a player would be able to do that, I'll X-nay that idea. It's like, nope, I'm not going to allow that to happen because logistically speaking, in no way would a level 1 player be able to achieve the same thing. And I like that rule for me because it still means I can do whatever I want. I can make a god. I can make, an NPC who has, unlimited power, as long as it makes sense that a player could eventually do the same thing. And it is a little bit more fun that way too for me because, in my opinion, that helps me build out the lore of all of my NPCs. Because if I'm trying to build them in the moment without building them from the ground up, right? If I need to have them be built for something, but I don't quite want to do the full character sheet, right? When I do my backtrack idea, it's also helping build that lore and helping me kind of pre-build that character sheet without
kind of
having
talk
it.
about like what they would have to go through to get to this point and be like, hey, he's going to have to have gone through this. He's going to have to have seen this. He's going to have to have experienced this in order to be the thing that he is now.
Building a lot more lore than I may have had already for that NPC based on whatever I needed him for.
And then, it's pieces like that, like having those moments in the back of your mind. You could be like, oh my gosh, this is a perfect moment to fulfill this piece of his backstory that would have had to have happened, or this piece like, hey, you would have had to have gone to wizarding school at some point to get this thing. So guess what? You guys are at the same wizarding school. He very well could have gone here because he lived in this town. And so maybe he's an alumni of this place.
Right.
And so it's stuff like that. It's like when you find things that fit, that work, and it very much, just like you said, helps to build and just put all the puzzle pieces together.
And when I do eventually have to build out that character sheet, having done that, having put all of those breadcrumbs into how that character works, having put all of the lore into it to be like, okay, this is roughly how it would have happened or what the process would have been. When I go to build out that character sheet, it makes it a lot easier to put all those pieces together, and decide, okay, if this is what he was going to have to go through, right? Because there's a big thing about sometimes I will roll and make stats random for NPCs, and then other times I will basically fill them in. But I never, like, again, how do you balance out yourself, right? It's very difficult to be honest with yourself and make things balanced if you're filling them out. But doing what we just talked about, having that history thought through about, okay, how would a player have gotten through this by leveling up, by playing through my realm, having all of that done, and then thinking, okay, well, you would have had to do this, this, and this. You would have had to overcome this. Well, I wrote this in your backstory. So then I look at, well, to make all of that work, what bare minimum stats would you... I mean, if I say that you've defeated a dragon, with a broadsword, I think you might need a little bit of strength. I think strength may need to be your biggest thing. But if I also had in your backstory that, you needed a magical sword, so it doesn't have to be 18 strength because you had to have a magical sword, right? I start to put together all of the ways that, again, a player would have had to do it. And then I start to balance out the stats, which is basically looking at, okay, well, what makes it most likely that you would have succeeded? And what stats fulfill, like if you're a big, bulky, hero, you want to have high strength because that represents your muscles, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to have 12 strength, but you're like huge and bulked out. So I look at what details made sense for that character to go, what stats would have aided them and been more likely if they were higher than others. And again, based off the personality, what stats make the most sense? Are they just purely lucky? Is it intelligence based? Are they just really good with people? Are they manipulative? That will tell me what is their dump stat, what's their good stat. And then I'll just kind of balance out, like, again, I never look to min-max anything, especially my NPCs. I have no reason to min-max my NPCs. So, deciding between, a 16 or an 18 really just is the difference between what I wrote in their backstory and is an 18 really necessary to have accomplished that. If they did things where it's like, that would have been really, really difficult with a 16, and I didn't say it was really difficult for him, so that's probably going to be an 18. But this over here, there's no reason why it needs to be more than a 12. You know what I mean? He could have 3 12s for all I care. All I need him to be able to do is like these 2 things. And that's what I look at, right? I look at what I've built, what area they fulfill, and basically just dump the rest. And then sometimes I have fun and just really do dump stats. Like sometimes it's really nice to have an NPC
I do like that.
That's like he's super strong, super intelligent,
Trash at charisma.
and that's it. Well, just trash at charisma, has no wisdom whatsoever. So he's well read, remembers everything to a T, but is like the easiest person to swindle. Like he could be in his knight armor and you're like your shoes untied and he'll look down. Like that level of just has like a 9 wisdom, a 9 charisma. You're just like he's 9 dexterity because again he just has to just stand.
Would you ever say you want to leave open the possibility? Say you're not sure you want to solidify their like one of their stats. Would you ever, like, hey, I know he's got to be at least this strong. I know he's got to be at least this dexterous, but I haven't quite decided how charismatic I want him to be, and he hasn't been in a situation where he needs to be charismatic yet, so I'm just going to hold off on that.
I'll be right back to answer that, but yeah.
Okay.
The answer is yes.
Just because it's one of those things where definitely, as we said, like sometimes you just kind of got to do things as you go. You have to create what there's a need for. And so there'll be a lot of the times where I'm sitting here and I'm like, all right, I know he's got to be able to talk his way out of this situation, but maybe he looks like he's super strong, but it's only for show. Maybe he doesn't really have the ability to like punch this door down. And so he's super good at performance, at deception, at looking like he can play the part, but when it comes time for him to actually roll that athletics check, maybe not. So it's very interesting concept to be able to develop as you go. And I like that freedom as a DM. It's like, okay, there's a lot of unknown aspects. When you're a player, you kind of got to tell the DM everything. You got to set up your character sheet from start to finish. You got to put everything together. And I guess that, but even I like the idea of, weirdly enough, having secrets from the DM. And I know a lot of people don't like that idea, but like
that's a whole another topic that we'll have to talk about of how to do secrets. Cause I love the concept of secrets, especially amongst players. The biggest downfall of holding secrets away from the DM is it completely derails what they were planning, and your secrets, they're not accounted for. Like if you just say, oh, well, hey, I had this thing that I didn't tell you about and now I'm just going to do it. And it's like, but yes, it wasn't happening in the background.
Which is why I feel like it's important to do that with people who understand. It's not necessarily for just anyone or everything. And
yeah, if you have a much more open group, but that could be definitely its own topic, because there's pros and cons to that. It's just the biggest thing is the DM needs to maintain that control. But if you can have a very good group of people who can play without meta knowledge, like who can honestly know things and play without like just ignore that, then it's really good, because then it's really good to have. I think it's really good to have secrets, but again, keeping them from the DM is like if it would be one thing to have like, hey, you're a wizard, go ahead and write your spells, but you don't have to tell me what you wrote down. So I'm going to be surprised during combat.
Yes, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
But you saying, hey, DM, I'm going to go shopping. I spent 1,000 gold.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what'd you buy? Something from this book. I'll tell you later. And it's like, what do you mean you bought something from this book? Is it available? Like, it's in the book. Like, like, hey, I have a feat. I didn't tell you about it in my backstory. But you know what I mean? Like when you say secrets from the DM, it's like there are things that can derail, but then there's plenty of times where it's like you can totally as long as there's an agreement.
Like the thing that I was thinking of, because I like the mindset of, okay, so I am a spellcaster. Like everything that I would do would be completely like within the rules, kind of like you were talking about, like not telling you what spells I prepared that day.
But just have them written down. So if I have, you can't just say, oh, I prepared that, because it's situational. And
so one of the ideas that I had was because there's a spell, I think it's called Glyph of Warding, where you can just basically cast a spell. It lasts indefinitely and it only goes off when it's triggered,
Yeah,
right? And so I had this idea of
Glyphs. They're called glyphs, not runes. I brought that up before,
Yeah.
and I think I kept saying runes, but they were glyphs.
But basically like casting one of these things on like every page, right, of like a book, right? And so like you could do different kinds of things with it. Like maybe I just like store a whole bunch of spells in this book, and each one has their own command word that'll trigger it, and I just know what they are. So I'm basically just storing like a book of spell scrolls that I can trigger with one word at any point in time that I have just sitting in here, just hanging out, you know?
Right.
And like you can do all kinds of different stuff with it, or there was this this moment where
So like this is perfect, but this is where it's like the delineation between you and your DM knowing that you own that, and so at any point you can just cast anything, and they know you have a laundry list. That's one thing. Versus not telling them that you've created this item because you're like, hey DM, I bought a magic book. Remember 5 sessions ago about that magic book? Mm-hmm. You know what I've been doing when we were not playing? I made this infinite spell, but you know what I mean? Like that's a secret you don't hold.
Yeah.
From them. So I think it was just more of a when you say secret, my mind
yes,
went to
it's like, what are you?
What are you trying to do? Like you can't just throw shit in there.
But I know this is way too off topic, but just along those lines, I only just now thought of this idea. Imagine if each one of the pages had one word trigger to set off that spell, and you said a sentence that triggered, like each word of that sentence triggered another spell. Could you technically cast an entire plethora of spells with a sentence? Because normally, traditionally, the way magic, you only cast one spell per turn, right?
No, I got you.
But I'm like,
and I have a mechanic to where you can hold a spell.
Yes,
I have that mechanic to where you can hold spell, so you can get 2 off and around with that. And I have other ways that you can get off more than 1 spell, because I don't necessarily like the 1 spell per round max cap. Now, that could be a very, very clever way of doing it, because there is some value to that, because you can because I even have mechanics for how much you can talk before it starts to like interfere with you and your players and everything. Exactly. So I would say that would be a longer conversation between the DM and the player upon creation, simply for the fact of now you're getting into how does the mechanic of the spell go off? Is it off the page? Do you need to be holding the book out? Because if you say all 3 words, are the pages flipping fast enough? Is the 3rd spell going into the next 2 pages ahead of it, so it's casting the spell in the book?
Yeah.
It would be more of a. It's more
logistical than it is.
That is not a blanket answer. That is more of a how did you build it? Because if it's a all spells emanate from the book, then you have a case to say. So if I just use fast, if I'm a rogue and I use fast talk, so I give this book to the rogue that I've pre-prepped, and then the rogue just uses fast speak and says these words, we can get 10 spells off and around. Like, again, that's between you and your DM.
For sure.
I would set limits. It would be more of even though you've reduced the casting time of the spell has an effect time. It still goes off instantaneous, but there's a magical effect, right? It has to go from the book to that, although it may be instantaneous, multiple spells trying to emanate from the book instantaneously. That would basically be like saying, so if I have a wand with 3 charges, can't I just release all at once?
All 3 charges all at
the same time? Why can't I just go, if it's the command word fire, can I just go fire? Like, why can't I do that?
Yeah.
And if you have that mechanic, that's where we talk about consistency. If you want that kind of mechanic, you could make a wand that has multiple charges, and you can cast any number of charges in a round, because it's only a single command. Like, it depends on the rule book. So
that's very fair.
I like your idea. I like your idea with it, but yeah, it's that.
Again, a little bit of a tangent. My apologies.
Yeah, but going back to your question, so when I'm creating NPCs, and again, kind of doing the whole, I like to fit them in, but constantly thinking about if and when I'll have to like actually build it out. I fill out, and I think this is kind of also apparent the way I'm categorizing these. I basically fill out as little as I need. So if they're going to be combat oriented, I'm going to have a stat block, because I need all of their stats for combat, because unlike charisma, right? They were, unless they're a bard, I'm not going to have like charisma, but
it would be saving
I'll
throw
have all
here
the
and
stat
there
plots.
You need, but
if they're only going to be like someone who is dialogue based, but they're gonna be like more like a puzzle, I may only give them intelligence and wisdom, assuming that you guys are gonna use, like proficiencies or feats that specifically like, like deception and things like that, right? Like, so if this guy, like, if I know you guys are going to try to, not know if you're going to lie to him, but like a person that is, I know I've created this NPC to be lied to or persuaded.
Yeah.
I would make sure I know what his wisdom, intelligence, those kind of things are. But I may not need his strength. You know what I mean? Again, it may be contextual. I may not need that whole stat. So it's more of one of those things where I only give NPCs what I need. Another added benefit to this, you bring up a good point talking about this, by not having all of it filled out, it's easier at first glance, especially like when I used to do it on cue cards, when I used to do it on like little 3x5s, if they had stats on and everything. Because if you have, instead of a whole character sheet, if you have them on notes, but if you have certain stats but not others, it's also a quicker reference to what that character is used for. If the NPC only has attack stats, it's a combat-based NPC.
Yeah.
If it only has deception, and persuasion stats, that's what the expectation is. So it's another way to categorize NPCs, and that's, to me, I just look at it as it's easier to keep track of all my NPCs if they're not all filled out. Because it's just, I get overloaded with information. Yeah. It's just how my brain works.
It really is.
I want succinct, right? So I only add if and when it needs to be added, right? I give you, if I intend this NPC to be nameless and you ask for a name, I put a name out there. And that's on me to now put down in my notes. But that's it. I have a name. If you ask other questions, I will put little tiny notes down as to what I need to remember about that.
I told this guy he has a wife. Yeah, all right, cool, he's married. Great.
But why am I'm not sitting there writing the novel yet. I'm not sitting there creating this NPC's character sheet.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is making sure my consistency will last. So the next time you come back and you say, hey, how's the wife? Or, if you mentioned something to him, I might make a little note so he remembers to bring it up the next time you come in. Like, that's as much as I do. Mm-hmm. Because that's the immersion. That's the level. Because you also got to remember, we've talked about this. DMs are just as much players as players are. And if that's all the effort I want to put into that NPC, that's on me. That's my play, right? That's I don't want to give this guy anything more. I don't want this NPC to be anything more important. I'm only adding these details because you guys asked for them. But why am I going to add anything more, right? I don't want to give this guy stat blocks. It's one more thing I'll have to remember and bother with. He wasn't ever meant for that. I don't want to ever use him for that.
Yeah.
As first from you guys being ignored. Sorry, this is trying to stay on topic because we have, like I said, this was not a very specific topic. It's a collaboration of topics on just working and utilizing NPCs because again, every aspect of working with an NPC from a DM's point of view is unique, right? It's not like they're not characters. They're not playing characters and all of that. So do apologize. It is just a
whirlwind.
Yeah, it's a whirlwind of topics to keep up with. But yeah, so when it comes to, creating them, I put in as little detail as I need to play them, to work with those NPCs. I don't document as much as I should, but at the same time, I have a hard time documenting things because then it's like you get into the thing where it's like, well, you met that shopkeep in what town? Well, it's like, so do you just have all the NPCs from one town? Then do you just have all the towns like how it gets to a certain point to where, if you would literally had a piece of paper for every single NPC, I mean, you would literally have a file cabinet. Every single time someone wanted to talk to somebody, you'd be going into a file cabinet.
Which one are we going with now? Yeah.
Which is why I've tried to step down how much I do when I build up my NPCs, right? I need just what I need, right? Yeah. I need the bare minimum in order to move forward with actually getting across, the plot, or moving the campaign forward, or getting the task that I need that NPC to do.
Curious sometimes, because for me, I build my notes a little bit differently. I build because whenever I start whatever I would call as a campaign, like a group of my players coming together to play a specific game with me, I first integrate all of them into each other, right? And so I figure out like why you all exist here, why you're all motivated to do whatever you do, but it all like intertwines with the other people, just because I like to make sure people are going to stay involved with each other. I want to make sure that the people at the table are purposely playing with the other people at the table, because it's really easy to like, oh, you don't need to be here anymore, or so whatever, just too much table politics, right? So I like that aspect of it. But because of that, a lot of the times whenever I have NPCs, I want to make sure that those NPCs are associated with each individual player. So a lot of the times when I take notes, these are that player's NPCs, and sometimes they'll be on both. So like, I a lot of the times have a difficulty organizing my notes, because it's like, all right, if I don't need like a whole bunch of notes on whatever this person, let me just put these here or put these there. Like I want to have some sort of like just organizational, like that's why I like the one website that I use, the Goblin Notebook, where a lot of the stuff comes from. Like, it just helps me to keep everything in a semi-organized place. But even with that, like, you have so much options as to how you put it together, where you put your notes, you know. And so that's a whole nother, you know, topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
But just how you stay organized as a DM. But it's really challenging, making sure that you stay consistent with your NPCs and with those players and where they all come from. But yeah.
So kind of moving on to the next stage, because we talked about creating the NPCs, right? And there's a lot of different ways to create them, whether you're actually just creating them from the ground up, you know, actually with character sheets, or if you're just filling them in where they need to be. And I kind of like doing the latter, but using the mindset of how did they get there in order to make it consistent, in order to make it achievable for anybody. But we've brought up before about, you know, NPCs breaking the rules. And granted, yes, I think that, you know, all DMs allow NPCs to break the rules in some, you know, capacity. But again, I try my hardest to allow, you know, to not have that, right? To basically what players see, they can eventually achieve if they can't already. But the broader question of whether or not NPCs should be allowed to break the rules. And by break the rules, I mean be able to do something and you wouldn't allow a player character to do. Whether that be cinematically, or whether that be actually a game mechanic, something that, again, you've allowed this NPC to do that isn't an actual game mechanic that the players would be.
Are you referring to this on a consistent basis or a one-off basis?
Or either. It's kind of just an open question. It's more of the next phase of this is after creating NPCs. You know, the next part about using NPCs is like whether or not there's a justification for DMs to allow NPCs to break the rules.
I would say, number one, why do you want that to happen? Right? So that's my first question. And if the reason why you want that to happen is for your own rule of cool, if the reason why you want that to happen is to drive the plot in a certain direction, I think there are reasons to say okay, but within those same reasons, I believe, are the answers to explain why it's something that the players might not be able to do in the future, right? Like I think we had mentioned before, like, okay, you are blessed by this god who has godlike powers and can break the rules, has given X, Y, and Z person ability to do this thing that, yeah, you can't do. They get to break the rules, but because this god is helping it, because they want this thing to happen, they want to make sure this moves the plot in the direction they want it to go, they gave that person the ability to do what they needed to do in that moment, right? You know, maybe it's the BBEG's lair, right? And he has invented a way that his lair gives him the ability to do a thing that nobody else can do, right? And so
if I kind of just if I'm taking this in correctly, so you're saying that you would allow it as long as there's still a lore reason, even if it's unobtainable by the players, if it still makes sense in the lore that this can be done by this person, as long as it's not just a DM saying he does it because he can.
Yes, unattainable. See, I personally have a hard time with that term, unattainable.
Exactly.
And I feel like for the same reason.
But what I mean is, like, you're making good examples, right? Like, you don't mind an NPC who slaved away years and years, discovered something, and yeah, nobody else can do it. You can't just do that because he figured it out and he's gonna, die with that knowledge. That's lore. In the lore, that makes sense, right? That's still not saying that they can't do what he did. They just don't know how he did it. That's one thing. But what I'm saying is, like, giving an NPC like feats that don't exist.
So consistently being able to
you just want this NPC to do something. You have the rules where you can have like legendary actions and things like that. But you're just like, hey, I'm making an NPC. He's a fighter, but he can do this other feat where he gets like an extra multi attack. Just because, you know what I mean? It's not a feat that anybody other fighter could get. It's not a build that anybody can strive for. It may be a bad example. I'm just trying to think of, like, because again, I always have a reasoning for it, so I don't really like break the rules with NPCs.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, like, when I've seen, things like that happen where, it's usually based on like a spell that they can do is not a standard spell. It's just something that
a spell that
made
other
sense
people
to happen.
can do something that theirs can't. Like, they used a wall of force to like hold back a tidal wave or something like that. Or
right, but that's not how it would actually work.
But it just worked for him in that moment. Like, I would say there are times like that. You see, again, I would have a hard time letting something like that happen, especially if I'm not going to say the players can do it too.
Right.
Right? Like, again, I like giving my players ways to cheat, right? To do stuff that's not normal. So if they wanted to do that, like, give me something from one of your buddies that's going to help you do that. Find some item you're going to break and destroy that'll give you some weird power to be able to give this wall of force a property that it shouldn't have already, Like, give me anything goofy and weird that I can find a way to help you make this work, because I like making that stuff work. But again, if I want my PC, or if I want my NPC to be able to do that, like, I would love for I like the inspiration of stuff that I'm doing with my NPCs to inspire my players to want to do cool stuff like that too.
No, exactly. And that's my point. So I think another example we brought up, we mentioned this before, is like the superhero landing, right? So let's say there's a cinematic, you're bringing in an NPC, and let's just like, basically for all intents and purposes, there's no justifiable way or rhyme or reason why this NPC would just fall out of the sky and do it, like, the superhero landing middle of the battlefield, and then just change the tide of battle, right? But that's like not even, ignoring the Deus Ex Machina, NPC is going to save the day. But like something like that, just allowing a random NPC who has a build, who has everything else, but just because the moment called for, I just want to intro him really cool, so he's going to do this game-breaking thing, which nobody else would be able to do. And it's not like something I'm going to do over and over and over, and it's like an ability. It's just, in that case, again, now dropping it down, not to a game-breaking ability, but let's drop it down to when and where, or is it okay for DMs to, do that with NPCs? Like, break the rules into a way to where it's like, hey, guys, guess what? You players, no matter how cool your heroes are, you ain't ever going to be that cool.
I don't see the reason for that. All that feels like to me is the DM trying to one-up their players. That's really all it feels like. It's just like, hey, I want to be cooler than you because I'm the DM, and I want you to know that I'm in charge. Like, I don't know. I mean, like, maybe there's just something specific that they have in mind that, like, hey, I want this to be like this in my world, or whatever the case may be, which is fine. But overall, like, the attitude of I can do this and you can't just makes me feel like, why are you trying so hard to stop me from doing something I think is cool. Doing something that you showed me is cool.
I think a lot of times too, going back to what we said in the very beginning, I think that happens, but I think it's not always that way in terms of the malice, in terms of the I want to be cooler. I do think that happens, but trying to look at it from a nicer point of view as well, it could also be, I think a lot of DMs get caught up in the cinematic of the story, of the narrative, right? They want to do this build up. They've been thinking about it for a while, where they're like, man, just think about what happens on the movies when that happens, and it's like they know this NPC and they think he's dead and he's just gonna like they've built it up so much to where sometimes it might be they want to outdo everybody, but other times it may just be that they are worked up about this moment.
And I totally get that.
And they're not really thinking about the implications of, well, can that character do that? Can my players now do that? And that's where, again, it's like,
I see that. And
I'm totally about the cinematics, but that my cinematics suffer from the same thing when I build a character. Is when I'm thinking about it, I'd have to backtrack and go, would this still be possible to achieve, right? I always like, we always like that breadcrumb of, would this be possible to achieve?
My thought process is, if the DM is really excited about how cool that is, why wouldn't they want to let that be something that their players could do?
Exactly.
Right, and that's the only reason why that was my initial response. Is it's like, okay, I totally get that you get super excited about some cool stuff. I'm for sure on that train, but
then to follow it up with saying no, but no one else can do that. That was just the NPC.
I'm like, I get you want a cool moment. I get you don't want to unbalance your game, but I mean, obviously, depending on what it is,
right?
Like, is this going to unbalance the game?
Like another good moment where you built an NPC. It's a non-magical NPC. They don't cast magic. They don't have magical armor. Basically, like, you've set it up to where it's just it's a dope NPC, but for all intents and purposes, they're just a person.
They're just a dude.
And you have that moment where you're all fighting a dragon, and the dragon's breath weapon just comes down. Halfway through the fight, guy's been everyone knows he's well under half health, and the breath weapon just takes it full, and he's still standing. Though that's another good example of the NPC for cinematic purposes breaking. And again, no reason. There's no... The DM could say anything at this point, but everybody knows there was no justification for that. Like, you could say a wizard came in out of nowhere, but like, where? Like, we've been fighting this thing for the last 5 hours in real life, 10 minutes in game. There's no fucking, you know what I mean? Like, there's moments like that where it's like...
real bad on his damage. Just real bad.
Yeah,
I
right.
took 1,000 damage. How was he still alive?
Yeah, and it's those kind of things, right? So it's like, I don't think it's appropriate to allow NPCs to fully break the rules. And it's funny because I've mentioned, like, I feel like when I mentioned like the Deus Ex Machina, just the coming in and just like making almost railroading it in a sense, just taking over and being the savior of the day, or just deciding to railroad and force the way. But there's also the opposite of that too, in a way, where it's like you have those battles that don't go quite the right way for the DM, and they're like, they didn't want the battle to end so quickly or so badly, or not at all, like they weren't supposed to lose. So then they abrupt end. They just, battle's over, and either the person gets away for some unexplained reason, or just because, like, oh, well, just like in a video game, even though you're about to kill him, I'm gonna cut into a narration and he's gonna get away, kind of thing.
Punch the cutscene.
I mean, I get it. It's rough because, especially if you're trying to force it, or not force it, but if that's the plan for them to get away, like, I get it, and I don't mind fudging that a little bit, where it's like, you can let them get the final blow, but that doesn't have to technically be the full amount of hit points he had, right? Like, you can always fudge some of those numbers. You can always get to that, like, you can always let the enemies do the last round or whatever, and still let the bad guy get away if it's truly like this cinematic. But it's that forced feeling of it, when everyone kind of has that realization of nothing mattered. It didn't matter what you did.
Yeah.
That's the hard reality of it that I think is when NPCs break the rules. That it's not so much the disheartening aspect of, well, I want to do that and now I can't, but it's also sometimes it just takes away from, oh, well, now that NPC's here, nothing we did mattered because it was always going to end in this, or it was always going to lead to this, or, oh, we didn't have to worry about dying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No matter what. Yeah. Interesting.
Cosmic says he even has a, okay. So with the Bane and the curse thing that you were talking about, 5 tattoos.
See,
one on each. Oh, one on each. Okay, so one on the neck, wrists, ankles. Okay, so he has. Yeah, so his like Bane and curse thing will be based on tattoos.
See, I like that. I was even talking to you about my, not Deus Ex Machina or like Getaway. I had some players.
Oh yeah,
running
yeah.
through
You're like your
situation,
single spell
and
tattoos.
I had no plan for this. Like my players like wrecked the situation. Like I had planned for them to win, but I had also planned for these particular PCs to get away so that they could like fight them later.
Oh, so just what we were just talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I wanted them to escape, but like they chased after. Like all the PCs never want the bad guys to get away. They always want to kill them now. They want to capture them now. They want to ask all the questions now. You know, like even if there's story, like, and I get that because I'm a player that's like that. But
speaking of which, I've thought of a way to get around that. Adding in a small mechanic in combat where lethal is not the default.
Oh,
like you have to go out of your way to do lethal kills, or like, and then it's like even that is a special tier. You know what I mean? Like
interesting.
Like a death blow has to be harder than, like, you could still stab someone,
and
but they may just pass out from the blood loss. They may not die. So I've been thinking about that because it always is to a death. Everything is always bandits try to,
but even if they don't
money.
die, but if they go unconscious and they get captured, and it's like, but now they're
they're
completely in your control, and it's like when you give the players like control of the narrative and like what's happening, it like you were talking about earlier, sometimes can derail everything else that's happening, and it can make a lot of future events make a lot less sense now. And so like in order to protect a lot of what's going on in the future, you have to ensure certain things happen, but you want to do that without making your players feel like exactly what you talked about, like everything they do doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And so I like Cosmic's idea, like of I mean, the curses and the boons are actually pretty sick, but like the tattoos, I don't know why, but I really love like the ideas of tattoos. And so my first instinct was, these guys have these tattoos on them, and most of the time people don't think anything of them, but these ones were like activated when you spill the blood like that's in the ink, so you have to like stab through your tattoo in order to activate these particular magic tattoos. And then after they've been stabbed and they've healed over, it uses all the magic in them and you can't use them anymore. So they're like one time use, get out of jail free cards. And so, sometimes like they in this particular situation, like they use them to get out of these situations, to escape from these people. But
so that brings up an interesting point too, is this, I think, is a broader problem that we'll have to discuss on a different episode, but there's a broader problem here, which is it boils down to player entitlement. Because what you were just talking about, where in my opinion there should be nothing wrong with a full combat initiative ending, the enemies all going down, 0 hit points. That is the official ending of the combat. But I have nothing wrong with saying that doesn't mean everyone's dead. That just means combat's over. They are out of combat. HP, meaning your ability to survive in a fight or your willingness to, right? So if you look at it from that point of view, if you don't say that they're dead but they're down, I don't see any issue with end of the fight. They're like, yes, the last guy, goes down, heavy breathing, and as you gather yourselves to look around, he like throws dirt up at you, and as you go to block your face, he gets up and he runs away. I don't see anything wrong with narrating out the ending of combat. The problem is, all of the players would immediately be like, "What?
I chase after him. I shoot him in the back.
Don't I get to roll? Can't I stop it?" But like, guys, like, you don't do that in a movie. You don't argue that, well, why didn't they just chase after him? Like,
Well, a lot of people do. I'm not gonna.
yeah, but that's the thing is, like, I don't see a problem with that. The problem is player entitlement would say, well, I want to do X, Y, Z. And it's like, look, guys, he ran away. Like he got away from you. You guys are exhausted. You guys have just fought. You know, you're covered. You know, like the thing is you shouldn't have to fight the players, but you will have to fight them. But DMs, I think we need to stop giving into that. You know what I mean? Like the narration and you are in control of how the game goes. If someone's going to run away and succeed, they're going to run away and succeed. You are the one providing the players with opportunities that, like, it's I love when DMs allow players to come up with their own opportunities, asking, hey, can I make this check? Can I do this? Can I do that? But in the end of the day, especially if you go back to the original rule sets, the DM decides when players do stuff. So if you say this person runs away and it says, well, I'm going to take out my bow and I'm going to shoot him in the back, he's not getting away. But like, DMs, you don't have to sit there and go, well, he said he does that and he has his bow. It's like, you're the DM. You're the one who decides if an attack can go off right now. Now, if you say this guy runs off, well, can we do anything? Well, do you want to shoot him? Like, you're the one who presents the ideas. You don't have to just because the character can do something doesn't mean the DM has to allow it, right?
And yes, but at the same time, and again, you know me, I almost in every time we talk about anything, I always talk about player agency, but I do not want to confuse player agency with player entitlement, because I do believe those are two very different things. I'll say that there can be moments where it feels like it almost, in the same way we were talking about before, it almost breaks the immersion, where I feel like, imagine you have this like super strong character and he's trying to do something that makes sense that a super strong character would do, and all of a sudden I can't snap the spaghetti in half or something silly like that.
Yeah, you
or like
make an unnecessary
all
role
of a sudden,
for something that would
this dude out of nowhere, like just to make the narrative work that he gets away, I have no recourse. Like whatever frivolous attempt that he tries to throw in my face just works, and like I can do nothing about it. Like especially,
but see that's where I say the entitlement comes in though, is I can do nothing about it. But it's like that's where I tell you, you travel to this town, but you don't argue with me. But now I say that to push the narrative along, I say that what normally would happen is you flinch. And the guy gets up and runs. And obviously that's but
and I'm not talking about if there is a reasonable explanation. I'm talking about a lot of the times it feels unrealistic this situation to occur. And so it's like,
yeah,
with the player, I feel like it becomes a situation where can we unify and come to an agreement with an outcome that feels better. And that's where I'm coming from. It's like, okay, if I'm the DM or if I'm the player and I'm working with the DM, it's like, I get that this person needs to get away. But them just throwing sand in my face and me being able to do absolutely nothing about it sucks. It makes me look like I'm a chump and I don't know how to stop somebody from getting away. But if instead maybe they teleport out of there, maybe they disappear, something I have way less control over, way less opportunity. But then you have
the problem with balancing out, oh, well, you're just the DM and you're just doing it.
What's that?
Well, but then you're still balancing out so you can just teleport anyone that you want out of combat.
But again, and that's why I think it's more or less of just letting them do whatever they want and more of working together. That's why I really feel like D&D is very much a group effort to help build the narrative of like a really good story, right?
Oh, no,
and like
I
everyone's
absolutely
involved
agree.
in making that happen. And so
but the DM still has to realize that they are still in control of that narrative, right? Like I'm saying that, like, regardless of the player's response, there's no issue with the DM after combat taking control of the narrative again and allowing that to happen. Like, yes, there's a lot of ways that you can go about how to dialogue that out, right? Like how they're going to get away. But there shouldn't be a problem with the DM doing that. Like, you know what I mean? Like the person needing to get away after combat,
I'll say
be
that to me depends on the
point.
DM, because there are a lot of DMs who can handle situations like that very poorly. And, and so I don't think that's necessarily like, hey, any DM just take over and tell your players whatever it is that they're doing.
You know, I don't think players' first reaction is to get butthurt that the DM wants to now continue a story.
Right, but
and just because you want to do XYZ even if, again, because again, the DM is always there to help lead the story. And yes, you guys are in combat, you still want to do all of these things, but at the same time, now the story is progressing.
I think what we're talking about is the balance between the two.
Oh yeah,
because
but there's a thing where it's like, again, kind of what you were asking before. Why? If I'm letting this guy go away and you're like, oh, I'm going to shoot him. Why do you need him dead? Why do you need him dead? You've won the battle. You're going to get all the loot. Obviously, me as DM, I'm trying to have a narration here of the guy gets away. You know, if it's one thing where it's like, well, we know that he's an assassin and he's going to tell us where they are, that's one thing. But if it's like, it's kind of like what you were saying before of like when we were talking about NPCs breaking the rules. Do you need that to happen, or do you just want it and you don't want to be told no?
And again, that's my
problem as a DM.
I think that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying let's kill him, let's allow them to kill him, but it's more like, hey, okay, he needs to get away. But does it have to go down that way? Is there any way that I can...
No, we're both agreeing on that part. But what I'm talking about is when the players are like, no, I don't want that. I want this.
Right.
And it's like...
And
okay,
I agree with that.
That's not going to happen. And then they're mad because they're like, but I should be able to kill him. It's like, I understand you should be able to.
Sure.
But the narration's not going that direction.
What
and
I think
that's the area that I don't like.
Be helped with that, because I agree with that. I think that is, yes, needs to happen. But I think saying that it happens the way I say it happens, and I don't care how you feel about it.
But we've talked about railroading DMs too. Like we're not talking about a DM just saying, okay, combat's over, no one can do anything else. But what I'm just trying to make the point of there shouldn't be a generalized problem. Players shouldn't just immediately be like, you can't just say now at the end of battle XYZ. Like the players have to give up. The combat's over, your actions are over. The DM can now start the story again, right? Players a lot of the times immediately assume that just because battle's over, but I can still do X, Y, and Z. And it's like the narration can still happen though, right? Like that's the player entitlement I was talking about is when players don't realize when their actions are doable and when it's like the role play and the narration.
Exactly. Which is why I think there's that balance between agency and entitlement.
And that's where DMs have to be
you're
good
a part
at
of the story and
those.
you're not the story, right? You know, like
and you're talking what I think you're talking about more is the transition. How a DM transitions from going where player agency is in the lead and then going where the narration starts to take the lead.
I feel like player agency can exist in the DM's narration. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, even though the DM's narrating, I feel like, especially because I feel like you do a great job of this. Like, a lot of the times throughout our gaming sessions with you, you not only learn our characters and their habits and who and what they are, like you when those moments of narration, because I know exactly what you're talking about. There are those same moments where like stuff happens and we need to like move certain things certain places, and I'm totally good with it, especially because I know that when you take that opportunity, you're taking care of my character in that moment. You're taking my character into consideration. You're not just going to be like, oh, Davd, even though you are an earthbender and you're really good at maintaining your footing and you have free running capabilities, you tripped. Right. You're not putting that in there. You're being like, yo, all these things, there was like a tripwire and somebody like you,
and that's what I'm saying is those are all fine, right?
That's what I mean by player agency within the DM's narration. That's what I'm talking about, is because it's like it's not just what you want to happen, it's what you want to happen as my character would enable it to happen.
And what I'm talking about is like that in that same situation, players being like, no, but see, I wouldn't be running down that hallway. It's like, you guys are running down the hallway. Shut the fuck. Like, that's what I mean by player entitlement.
I do agree with that.
When it's those things of like, you know, regardless of whatever situation, you know, whatever. Again, it's all semantics, right? My thing is like, when players just decide, well, I don't like the way the narration's going, so I'm going to decide my player would do something different. There's a time and a place when you have control of your character, and there's a time and place when the DM has it. I don't think either should ever be railroaded. I don't think either should be full control. But when it comes to like, you know, progressing the story, there is a leniency, right? That it goes back and forth. Most of the time the player has more control than the DM, but sometimes the player has to realize the DM has more control of the character. And those are the times where it's like,
I think
it's fine to bring up things, right? It's fine to say,
knows
hey,
more. And as
you
a
would
result,
hope so. You would hope so. And this is where, like, again, it comes down to the DM. If the DM's not taking into account your character and just making you look like a fool for no reason at all, bring it up, right? But don't interrupt just because you don't like how the narration's going, right? It's one thing to be like, hey, why did my character do that? That doesn't make sense. Like, I wouldn't have just run down that hallway and then punched the guard out as we walked by.
So
versus
with that note, okay, like, out of curiosity, so, and I know this might be like way too nitpicky or whatever you want to call it, but like,
because we don't do that here.
Cosmic is going to say tangents any second now, but if you're in a situation where the DM's narrating something and maybe he unintentionally misspoke or said something inaccurate, is that a moment that you would find acceptable? You're like, actually, it might be like this, or
I prefer,
it makes more sense, or wait till I'm done and then
depends on how long the monologue is, because obviously if it's just forever and it's a moot point, who cares? But if it's an actual thing where they're describing something and it's like, they misrepresent how you move or whatever, I would never just, that's not how I move. That's the entitlement of, your narration's wrong, I need to correct it now. I prefer the respectful way that I like to go about it, especially to another DM, is asking for clarification. Hey, you said I was moving like this. Does this over here count? Or you said XYZ, I thought ABC. Can you clarify? Or, hey, when you said this, did you actually mean? I just like to do that because it's respectful. It's especially not telling them they're wrong. It's letting them correct it. But it's also that whole thing of, they may have a reason. I always, as a player, because I've been a DM,
with that, because
as a player, I never assume a mistake is malice, and I never assume a mistake is a mistake. I always ask for clarification. Why? Because it's respectful. But two, I don't ever want to make it seem like they're wrong, because they may have an explanation that I don't understand. They just didn't get to it.
If that's the case, say they made a comment that either was or wasn't a mistake, but I notice it, and say for instance, that Dobbed has set up his thing, like, just in passing, he's swinging his ring.
Yep.
He's swinging. That's just a thing that he does, right? And say there is a moment where, for whatever reason, you didn't take that into consideration. Or you purposely, or maybe you did take it in consideration, but you said that it wasn't happening, or whatever the case may be, or whatever you describe would indicate that I'm not doing that, right? And so if I wanted to interject, if I wanted to say something, maybe whatever is happening would make a difference if I was. Maybe it would have an effect on the narrative and what you're explaining if I was. If this description is going on, if this narrative is happening in this moment, I would feel like bringing that up in the moment, especially if it would make a difference. So if it was a mistake, not necessarily assuming that it is.
In that particular case, I still wait till the end. Like, even if regardless if it's a blatant mistake, I still wait for the end. I as a DM and as a player, always prefer a retcon over an interrupt.
Interesting.
Always.
Okay.
Because with an interrupt, you're not just trying to correct the moment to correct anything future that might be wrong, but as a DM myself, you interrupt that flow. You interrupt that thought process.
Derail the momentum. Very much so.
The entire thing's a picture. They may have gotten one thing wrong. And unless it's like you all run across the bridge that you guys cut down 2 minutes ago that shouldn't be existing. That's one of those things where in those moments, when it's like an obvious, hey, we don't have a bridge to run across, I would do anything to not interrupt them, but to get their attention, to let them stop.
So in that situation,
but that's an extreme. That's an extreme. So we'll talk about in an extreme where it's like you guys run across the bridge and you're like,
see, that's what I'm talking about.
That's
those extremes.
That's fine. That's fine, because that literally is they're already like you're basically having that's an okay time to stop because you have to actually reset the DM
because it's
one
going
of those
down a direction that
but it
you
couldn't
wouldn't
be
end up
possible.
going down.
But if it's one of those things where
again,
it's
it
like
could be.
let's say it's combat and you're right before combat and you're like okay as you guys enter the room your shield raises, your sword goes up, blah blah blah, and everybody steps over here and you do this blah blah blah.
My shield.
Yeah,
You don't need
that
it.
would be that right there would be bad.
Yeah.
Because it's it's like it doesn't matter where you stepped. Whereas again, if it's more of the, and then you do this, blah, blah, blah. And you're, at the very end, you're like, hey, DM, like, yeah, it's like, so all of that happened, but wasn't I on the roof? Wasn't I spider walking? Be like, yes. So instead of being on the ground, you're now on the roof.
Yes.
Hands down. I would much rather do that because I've painted the picture in my head. I painted the picture in your head. It is 10 times easier to
just move
take
from
the
here.
sticker of that character and move him after the picture's been painted than to stop me halfway through and go, etch a sketch.
Now
Let me restart.
Let me repaint that same picture. You're saying all of that stuff, and you even add in there is a certain interaction that either I have with the environment or I have with another player, but I'm not even there.
Gotcha. I'd still rather retcon it. I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's so much easier to retcon than it is to interrupt because it's a flow of a game. Like you know how it is with DMing.
For sure.
There's just a thought process and you never want to get fully derailed. Now, granted, it's one of those things there's no hard and fast rule. But if it's one of those things where it's so obvious that this will undo anything else said after this, like absolutely, like again, there is no bridge.
The train.
Let it go ahead and get derailed and let the DM restart because it's like, oh, my bad. I totally forgot you did that. Let me reset this. Because the DM's obviously on misinformation. But if it's a misspeak about, even if it's a situation that like, you guys come into the room and he misrepresents what order you're in, that's still easier to fix after the fact because the overall aspect, you still came into the room. You may have to reorder yourself, but I'd rather you guys reorder the position after I've already explained what you saw. Like, it doesn't matter that I said you walked in first when you were in the back. The fact is you all still came into the room, what you saw.
What about if you're about to describe us walking into a room that we're not walking in? What if we said, hey, we walk into door number 2 and you start thinking maybe you misheard and thought we were walking into door number 1. You start describing everything that's happening in door number 1. We're like, wait, we didn't walk in that door.
That's fine too. Yeah. Again, that's a total DM is wrong on a completely wrong derailment and you want to reset them. But I'm trying to think of a good example of like, again, if it's fully derailed, if it's basically the DM is describing off of wrong information, it's okay to do what you can politely to interrupt. But if I'm just describing something and I misdescribe what you're wearing or misdescribe how you walk,
I feel like that's
where your placement exactly is. Those are things that can be fixed in post. Because
100%.
after I paint the picture,
100%.
then we can go, hey, by the way, I was actually over here. Okay, cool. Let me just switch that. The rest of it mattered, right? And there's no hard and fast rule. Just pay attention.
I totally feel that. I definitely feel like that's an energy.
But for me, 100%. If I were to choose, though, I would always rather retcon. Even if it's the room thing. Even if it's the whole, you guys run across the bridge that isn't there. You guys go into the room that you said you didn't go into. I'd still rather be told after I'm done with the description, like, actually, we went into the other room. Like, good. Now you know what's going to be in the other room if you ever go in there. I would still feel much better because at least I got my train of thought out. And I'm happy with it, and then I can reset. For me, it works that way better.
Yeah,
and I just find it more polite. If I'm with the DM and I hear that derailment, I will politely just try to get their attention without interrupting them because I know how the thought process works.
Yeah.
But I will try to do like
I'm the type of person
wrong.
like I can get myself to a pause point in my train of thought that I can. All right, I know I can come back to it if I come here, and then I'd be like, okay,
and it's the same way, and that's when I'll step back.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I would just basically just wait for the narration to be done, and then be like, hey, by the way, can you clarify this one piece?
Yeah.
And some players don't like that. You know what I mean? Like they oh my god, it's too much information. Now you said this. Now you said that. To me, like that's
I get both sides to a certain extent because there are some times where especially if someone's trying to explain something to me, and I feel like that's different than a narration aspect.
Yeah,
right?
I just know for me in the way that I DM and the way that I narrate when I'm gaming, derailing my thought process, especially in something that I've either planned or am actively trying to build while I'm narrating, it's so much more destructive. outside of just what I was saying, because you know me and how I'm taking in everything.
Yep.
It's easier for me to finish a process and go, oh no, let me take a step back, because I know what steps I took.
Yes.
If I'm derailed halfway through,
then you're like
I'm
lost.
completely lost.
Yep, I know.
And
exactly
then having
what
to
you're
go
talking about.
backwards, and then it's like, well, now I don't even know what was real and what's not. But if I
Yeah.
finish and go, okay, I had that wrong. Okay, this still applies. Just forget. Like, again, it's easier to take away from a drawing than it is to redo the drawing.
I'm for sure here for that.
But I mean, good.
That's more DM etiquette than anything specifically NPC or related. But
I mean,
I do like that.
It's still the same thing. I mean, actually, I think that's all the NPC topics, though, that I really wanted to go over. We're just really creating them, and then again, how to implement them, how to use them, when it's okay for them to break the rules, when they should follow the rules, which is, I mean, that's really less of a just, I don't know. It's interesting because NPCs don't really have any rules to follow because they don't progress the same way. Unless they're gaming with the party, NPCs are what they are in snapshots, which is, again, why I only give the bare minimum, because when you see an NPC and the next time you see them, anything could have happened in the background, right? Like anything they could have gone through. So really, you're only seeing snapshots of NPCs. You also got to remember that from a DM point of view. Your players only ever see snapshots. They don't actually know these NPCs. They don't know what these NPCs are doing unless they're gaming with them, unless they're in the party. They are only seeing small little snapshots. So here's one of those things. You talked about having a hard time like organizing, like, just being consistent with NPCs and like their personalities or where they chipper this time. Mm-hmm. I had a hard time with that for the longest time. That's why I had the cue cards, and it just got overwhelming because then I would just be sitting there looking for cue cards half the game.
Which one is which?
It just doesn't make sense. But you also got to remember too, as long as you know and remember the generals, right? You know what this NPC knows. That's the most important. Mm-hmm. What kind of information they can give. Maybe even know what, when, and where they will give that information, right? The rest of it, even their personality, get called out on it. Because guess what? Let's say you have this, you have this personality, you have this voice, and your voice is off. Mm-hmm. Or you have the right voice, but your personality is all off. And you get called on it by your players. Expand on it. Oh, I just had a death in the family. Not you, the DM,
but the player,
character, the NPC.
Or, the NPC.
They're not chipper this time. Expand on that. Business isn't going good. Like there's no reason an NPC has to be perfectly consistent. Now, granted, if you're a good voice actor and you want to do like voices and all of that, that is consistency you want, right? But personalities change. You have to remember they're only seeing a snapshot of this individual. You could even have it. This is where one of the things I love playing around with too, is where I like having NPCs have two versions of personalities, a public and a private. One where you will get to know the private version. The more you get to know the NPC, the closer you get. Or I will use the public one as a kind of a mask. Not necessarily always for like a BBEG reveal, but just this is who I am in public. But that's not really my thoughts or my feelings or how so it's a fun way to work with NPCs, but it's also, I don't want to say a cop out, but it's also an easy way to justify if an NPC changes, right? It's just a snapshot of the day that they're having. It's a one time in their life that these players are seeing. So also don't worry about having a fully fleshed out. I mean, have you ever had a day where a random stranger comes up and says, "How are you doing?" And you're just so white noised that you were like, how would I even answer that question to you, sir? That you've had those days where you aren't even fleshed out enough to answer that basic question.
I can't even. No.
Again, and so you've had those bad days. So why can't an NPC? Why does an NPC have to be that perfect build?
And that's very fair.
Every time. Why can't they have a bad day? Why can't that NPC just be oblivious? Why can't that NPC have ADHD and a bad memory? Why can't I do. This is one of the hardest rules I had to remind myself. NPCs do not have to have perfect memory. That is one of the hardest rules as a DM I had to learn about my NPCs. They do not need perfect memory. NPCs are allowed to forget whatever the fuck they want. They're allowed to forget faces, just like every other living creature out there. So guess what? If an NPC, you don't remember how to work it, or you don't remember like what they talked about with the party last time, guess what? Neither does the NPC, and it's fucking normal.
Who are you again?
This is that player entitlement, right? Players expect.
I was just in here last week, and I'm like,
Yeah, why can't you
so
remember
are
me?
1,000 other people.
Guess what? I have all of these notes, and then you can almost mock them with the NPC, like, you took notes on our conversation. You take notes on random conversations you have with people. Like, but again, like you can.
Everything's important.
But that is the funny thing, though. It's like where you got to think, you don't remember conversations like that on a day-to-day basis. You don't have those kind of notes.
Do you remember what you said to the barista today?
Exactly, right? You don't remember word for word, and they may not remember you, but they're going to act like it. You know what I mean? Like, even have that. Even have an NPC that acts like they remember the party, and then just literally just be like, yeah, this NPC has no clue who you are. But
inside check.
I think those are ways to work with NPCs. And I guess that you could say those are breaking the rules because, you're not playing them consistently or you're not playing the same thing. But those are ways to make NPCs not feel as difficult to play.
Yeah.
Because they do feel sometimes the NPCs can feel very overwhelming.
Yeah, especially when you have a party of people who want to talk to everybody. Everyone's their best friend. Everyone's an opportunity to date somebody. Everyone's the
and I'm just saying, if you've ever been out in public, people are rude. Like if you try to go out in public and just ask every single person what their name and what their job is and all of that, you're going to get a lot of different responses. And I'm just saying, use that. Not every NPC has to be chatty. Not every NPC has to be happy and friendly and likable.
Yeah.
I'm just like the idea that we feel obligated to make, like, every NPC you talk to will have a personality, but they won't always be chipper. They won't always want to talk to you. You know what I mean? Like, there'll be some that'll just
And zombie is a personality type. All right, they could just be like, "Yes, can I help you?"
Yeah, that is 100% a personality type.
Now,
like,
please.
So yeah, when it comes to again, full circle, creating NPCs is fun and unique. It can be very overwhelming. I think the last thing people need to worry about, in my opinion, is building it from the bottom up. You know what I mean? Unless you're building for an encounter, like an NPC for an encounter, which I don't really call named NPCs half the time. Yeah, I don't feel like it's necessary to worry about all of the mechanical aspects of the NPC. Obviously, their purpose, why they're there, their personality, those are the most important things. And then what they can do, as long as it's not game breaking or just like, removes the players from the immersion aspect of going, oh, okay, so this guy just does whatever you want him to do. Mm-hmm. Like, as long as you don't go too overboard, I guess breaking rules with NPCs isn't a bad thing. It's just we wouldn't advise it. We wouldn't go that direction of letting them break rules, but there is an argument to be made for allowing them to.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made for allowing NPCs to break those rules within reason. And yeah.
I like it.
I think that's again, I don't even know what the topic really was. Like, I don't...
NPCs and stuff?
Just NPCs and stuff. Yeah, just NPCs and stuff.
Okay, just as a side note, I did not realize that Tiamat was a her. If Cosmic is correct, because Cosmic's been saying like Tiamat herself. I didn't realize Tiamat was a her.
He's laughing at you.
Well, listen, I don't really check. Listen, in my opinion, all cats are girls, all dogs are boys. All right, that's just that's just the way I live my life. All right, I didn't really check Tiamat. I'm not. Which one are you?
I mean, that's fair.
Whatever, it's fine.
I'm sure it'd be interesting to see if that's ever actually changed throughout like any other versions or any lineages or any anybody who talks about it, because I mean there's so many different lores out there. I wonder if that's ever happened where there's like just a constant change of a detail like that.
That's
whether
fair.
it be with Tiamat or anything else. Just I wonder how often that happens where details like that just get kind of changed.
Always know that it's female because it's the mother of all dragons. I guess that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, if that's what it says.
I like it. I like it.
But yeah, I don't really have anything else on NPCs. I mean, I think we've covered actually quite a bit more than I expected to, especially how we actually like.
I guess the only other question I would have is, because we talked about it a little bit before stream about what necessarily constitutes an NPC versus a monster, right? Because, you know, you have stats for assassin, you have stats for war mage, and each one of those could be an NPC, you know, because they're a humanoid. They technically have the ability to converse.
if you're going based
you
off
know.
just like the term NPC is everything that's not the players. That's I
Right.
mean everything that's not the players is an NPC.
Unless you're being really specific about what you consider a character versus a creature versus a monster.
Yeah, and
versus
if you're being pedantic, because if you're thinking character, then it's something with, I mean, you could call it something with intelligence, intent, motivation, something that's played and not directed, I guess. I mean, I don't know, because I mean, do you play a monster, I guess, or do you just control a monster?
You choose okay.
Like from the DM's point of view, do you play the monster, or do you just control the monster?
Okay, let me ask you this: if an owl bear has its cubs killed, are you going to react with that owl bear the way a mother would react when her children?
Exactly.
If you're doing that, then I'd say you're playing the creatures, not just controlling them. Right? If it's literally just point and click and all this other stuff.
I would say that if I had to make a delineation between like what's an NPC and a creature, it's how much thought I put in to things like intent, right? So a creature to me uses so low level thought process. I just look at what's instinctual. Is it going to attack you? Why would it? Is it going to run from you? Why would it? Like,
so in that scenario, the mother reacting is still more on instinct rather than...
Yeah, to me, a creature takes no effort. Okay. I don't have to think about the creature's intents, their motives, their minds.
Because for the most part, it's universal. It's just base instinct.
A creature, a monster, anything that's on that level is just something that I don't have to put any of my own personal intent or thought into. So, yeah, I mean, anything that would just kind of react to the situation and not have any thought process, I put as a creature or a monster. Anything that's on the character level is something that has, its own, I keep saying intent, but it's more like something that could have its own agenda, something that needs thought put into it, something that, more or less I have a concept of cause and effect or, input, output of. I'm trying to think of something better because it's not always something with intelligence, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be an intelligent creature for me to consider it a character. It would have to be, and it doesn't have to necessarily be reoccurring either. It could be a single use. So I guess it really just comes down to whether or not I consider it an intentful thought from me. Like, do I have to actively think about what's going on from that individual perspective, or is it more of a, like what Kage had said, a generalized, blanket perspective of what would anything like that do? I guess also, if I put any individualism to it, maybe that's a better way of putting it, is if I assign any sort of individualism, because then I would still... I mean, I've played creatures and monsters like that have somewhat individual ideas or like different ways of interacting, but considering them characters, I'm trying to think what really made them different, when I play them differently, when I separate them out, when I look at them. What do I consider? Yeah, what is a character versus a creature? Maybe it's more of either cause and effect or more of perceived consequence. Maybe that's it. So a better way to put and answer this question is the difference between, in my opinion, a character and a creature is, am I thinking of cause and effect in terms of consequence? So a creature, I don't bother with thinking about consequence, right? A creature's just reacting to the situation. I may be putting myself in a individualized perspective, right? It may be scared, it may be angry, it may be reacting to this and that. But in the end, I'm not putting a great bigger thought on cause and effect or the outcome of what's going to happen, right? Whereas a character, I'm putting effort into thinking from their perspective, what does A lead to B? So did they have intent? Did they have a perspective? A creature, I just like, again, creatures in a battle, I may have them react differently for different reasons, but at the end of the day, this is a battle. There's no thought process of what happens. Like, they're just here for the battle. Whereas a character, whether or not they're intended to be reoccurring, there's enough thought process that cause and effect, the outcome of what's happening matters to their decisions. So it's more of that, am I making the actions thought out long enough to think about the consequences? If I'm not thinking about the consequences, then it's a creature. If it's thinking about the consequences, it's a character.
Interesting. Okay.
Because as a DM, if I have a random wild creature, I am not thinking about the consequences of what happens until it happens, because it's wild and it's just native. But a character has those thoughts. It has those individualized thoughts. It has an individualized perspective.
Yeah.
And more so than just a creature who's, yes, that creature has a blanket perspective, but it also has an individualized one. But a character thinks in cause and effect. A character thinks about outcomes. A character, both me as the DM and the character.
I mean, I guess creatures can plan. Like,
but it's how I approach it as a DM. When I play a creature, because I was trying to really think, like, there's a lot of different ways I could say creatures are characters. But when I really, really nail it down, the biggest difference, the thing that really separates a evil wizard that you're fighting from Darv the wizard.
Right.
That's how
Darv.
creative I'm feeling tonight.
I like Darv.
Is intent and outcome, right? This character, I have plans for. I know if this happens, this outcome, and I want these outcomes. I have intent for those outcomes, so I'm going to steer those decisions to get to that outcome. Whereas this evil wizard you're fighting, you're just fighting. Like, yes, the outcome is to win. But
just don't die.
His win or loss, I'm not contemplating what those outcomes are. If he beats you in battle, guess what? You lose a character. If you win, guess what? You get some XP. Whereas this guy, if he loses or wins, I'm thinking about what those things matter. And in the character's perspective. So that's the difference between a character. Because, yeah, you may kill a dragon and I have to think about the outlaw.
So sometimes bandits are just bandits.
Sometimes bandits are bandits because, for me, yes, I think of the fallout whether you kill them or not. But I'm not thinking it from the bandit's perspective. If they win, if you give them their money and they run away, I'm now not thinking, well, what are they going to do with that money and then where they're going to cut. Like, no, they're just bandits. They did
their bandit thing.
They live in High Point. They're just, things live in High Point and they just do their little things. But if it's a bandit that was sent by the BBEG to spy on you in order to get the necklace off of you, I'm thinking if they fail, he didn't get the necklace. If he succeeds, he gets the necklace. Whereas if I'm just throwing bandits at you because you're level 1 and I want you to get your first encounter, if they win and get your 2 gold, guess what? I'm never thinking about those bandits again.
Yeah.
Those are creatures. The other's a character.
Okay.
So whether or not
that.
I have to think of the outcome through the point of view of it is what separates a character and a creature.
Okay. I'm here for it.
But yeah, that was a good question. I like that one. The cursed. Not today. That was quite a bit that you posted earlier, but not today.
I did copy it all down, so if you want to get to it.
Well, I post it in Homebrewing so we can take a look at it in the Discord, and then once you have it all written up too, because I think you told us that was going to be a homebrew review too, so I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves.
Oh, that's fair.
I think
this is one of the things we're going
to.
Oh, very nice. That's exciting.
But yeah, share it in Discord so we can read more of it, because I think that is going to be the rest. I think that's going to be it for us today. I think that was all of the topics on NPCs I wanted to cover. Kind of a hodgepodge, stream.
But it was kind of cool though. I liked the ebb and flow. We definitely got a lot done. He definitely got a lot covered. That was cool though. Yeah, I like that topic.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, it's so hard sometimes because I think about it from the terms, point of view of like wanting to make good content for YouTube, But then it's like, also realizing that a live stream is that whole different realm because there is no script and there's going to be a lot more editing. I mean,
Yep.
2 hours and we might get a 10-minute video, maybe. So
Right.
I think there was a lot of good points. I think we eventually got there in the end.
Oh, for sure.
We hit all the points we wanted to. It was just kind of a pinball effect.
Right. That's all one boon and one bane. I saw like 4 different numbers in those things. It was like Bane 5.
I just saw blocks
Boon
of text
2.
and I'm just like, that was a lot of blocks of text to read and we had a topic to get to. So like I said, if you could repost it in the Discord, I'll take a look at it this weekend. I have some work I'm going to be doing on the Discord. I have some work to be done on the stream. Hopefully by the weekend, I would love if I could actually have our countdown music done by Monday.
Very cool. Very cool.
I'm hoping to get some good royalty-free countdown music for our countdown. That would be fantastic. I am considering teaching myself some basic video editing. It'd be kind of nice to have some sort of like mini 5-second intro.
Right.
And then also looking to expand that into eventually doing, or at least starting to build out the YouTube channel, maybe make some shorts or something.
Yeah.
Just, I'm curious. I don't think I'm going to have any interest in video editing. I think I'm going to hate it and be terrible at it. But it would be nice
That's
to
about as much you like the audio
get
editing?
started. Go ahead and put that in a home brewing since it's not done yet and since it's not going to be something that you're submitting. The home brewing channel would be perfect because then everybody can talk about it, and then we'll get to that this weekend. But yeah, no. So hopefully we'll get some work done. Hopefully I'll be able to get the countdown song done. And yeah.
I'm excited for it. I think it'll be very cool.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of nice. It's finding the one that fits the vibe, right? Finding the one that fits the mood of the stream, but also fits D&D, right? And there's already, I don't want it to be too cliche, but I also don't want it to be sound like it's going to be boring. You know what I mean? Like, it's a branding thing,
Listen,
branding's hard.
I cannot tell you how many times I see these videos talking about what the pause music is for some video game that's just a freaking banger, or the hold music on some
oh my god!
just
GoldenEye.
Yes,
GoldenEye.
yes,
64
that's another
GoldenEye,
one. I'm
dude.
like, bro, let's just.
That is just man, I can sit there and just listen to that the
let's
whole time.
go.
I want something like that, something that's catchy, something that sticks,
Exactly.
but also something that is, gets people in the mood for this. Because there are so many cool intros out there that are just they're upbeat, they're great, but they just wouldn't fit for what we do, right? It would be the wrong kind of vibe. So hopefully by Monday you guys will get some updates. Other than that, that's going to be us for today. I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you have a good weekend coming up. I don't know who else has a long weekend this weekend. I know some people have a 3-day weekend, so hopefully if you all have a 3-day weekend, that'd be great. Otherwise, join us on Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we will be back with D&D Discussions Homebrew Review. We have Inventorology's item, the pilotable spider tank.
Yes, the pilotable spider tank. That is correct.
That is going to be on Monday. So join us for that, and we'll be back on next Friday for more just regular D&D discussions. You guys have a fantastic weekend ahead of you, and we will see you next week, guys.
Deuces, my friends.